Hey guys, it's Mystic here with a new fic. I'm reading this still on my Chromebook again. I'm also in my bed, so you might hear my blanket when I move around a bit. But yeah, I was thinking of doing something for every day of October, but I don't know if I'll be doing that. I might just be posting random podfics here and there, but maybe try doing it daily for like Fictober, but not using any like of the prompts, since I couldn't find any ones that I really really liked a lot. So, but yeah, I do hope you guys will enjoy this. This is a 3-part series. Each has, well, I know this one has 1 chapter, but the other ones I'm not sure. This one's the one my friend recommended to me. So yeah, it's Paint Me and Trust by Dinomight, and it's a general audience fic. So yeah. Anyway, let's get started. The first mark Izuku gets is a slight brush of green across his temple. It's the soft touch of his mother holding her son for the first time. Inko has one to match, the same shade of green tainting the tip of her fingers. Hers is more noticeable. Izuku tends to blend into his hairline. He loves it anyway. He has to. It's the only soulmate mark he has, but not the only one he receives. There was once another one that Izuku himself does remember, but it's in all of his baby photos, a bright splash of dragon bread red across Izuku's little hand. He tries to imagine when it happened, how his father must have leaned over the hospital bed and smiled as he held his son's hand for the first time. Kinda hard when he doesn't remember what his father looks like. Sashi loved when Izuku was 2, and he took Izuku's second soulmate mark with him. And there's one more, a light dust of soot black across his knuckles, from where his hand brushes against Kachan when he handed him an All Might figurine. How excited they'd been when that happened. How quickly it had disappeared when Izuku told Kachan he's quirkless. Izuku wants to be happy with the one he has. He really does, but everyone around him, even his mother, has rainbow painted across their skin. And Izuku, he's colorless, unloved, worthless. He stares at his blank skin and he wishes. The other kids won't touch him. No one wants to be soulmates with a quirkless kid, they say. Izuku doesn't bother to point out that it wouldn't matter if they touched him anyway. These are marks of love. None of them love him. It's some sort of game to them. They figure out ways to hurt him without touching his skin. They throw his books in the trash, his shoes in the toilet, and when he's not looking, they wrap his fist in their jacket before punching him. Sometimes they'll play nice, pretend to be friendly for a day, and then they lean in, touch him, and Izuku gets so excited, so hopeful before they laugh in his face and run away. Izuku only falls for that one a couple times before he stops hoping. The only one who doesn't participate is Bakugo. He's not afraid to touch Izuku because he already has. They're not soulmates, not anymore. He leaves different kinds of marks instead, scrapes and bruises and burns in the shapes of stars. Izuku doesn't bother pointing out that Bakugo barely has more soul marks than him. For some reason, it doesn't matter to the others. What is a weakness on Izuku is a strength on Bakugo, apparently. He takes to wearing long sleeves even when it's hot, in the hopes that maybe if they don't constantly get reminded of Izuku's bare skin, they'll forget about it, in the hopes that maybe he'll forget about it too, if for only a moment. Sorry. It doesn't work. Sometimes Izuku likes to pretend. When his mother is busy at work or preparing dinner, he hides in his room and takes out his markers. He closes his eyes and picks a color at random, not green because he already has one like that. But once the marker's in his hand, Izuku rolls up his sleeve and lets the tip glisten over his skin, and he imagined who would leave the mark, what they would like, what their name would be, what it would be like to be loved by more than one person. When reality comes crashing down around him, Izuku goes to the bathroom and scrubs his skin until all the color is gone again, and he pretends not to feel the tears stinging his eyes. His mother finds out, she always does. It happens on a particular day when Baku was just this side of too rough, and his shoulders burning and aching. The pain distracts him from the clock, making him lose track of time. He doesn't notice when she gets home, not until she's knocking softly, opening his door. Izuku moves as quickly as he can, sweeping the markers under his bed and hastily pulling his sleeves down. But damage has already been done. Inko stands in the doorway, eyes wide and hands over her mouth, before she breaks down in tears, Izuku following close behind. In a moment, she crosses the room and pulls out her hand, rocking her baby back and forth, her fingertips brushing over his temple again and again, as if to remind him that that one is real. Inko doesn't try to reassure him. She doesn't tell him that he'll get more eventually. She doesn't tell him that one day his skin will be a canvas for love, and she's never been able to lie to her son. And then turns 14 and everything changes. It doesn't happen the first time they meet. When Izuku grabs onto All Might's leg, these claws separating his palm from the hero's skin. And that's the only time they actually touch for a little while. So it doesn't happen first time they meet, or the second, or the third. Then 2 months into training at the Goba beach, Izuku trips over a pipe, and All Might's, even in a weak form, he has great reflexes. He reaches out with one hand to catch Izuku around the wrist, pulling him up before he can fall. And when he pulls his hand back, there's a ring of gold stretching all the way around Izuku's wrist like a bracelet. For a second, Izuku thinks that maybe All Might had some sort of stain on his hand because something that he transferred to him. He goes to wipe it, but sees All Might staring at his own hand palm. It's green like Izuku's hair, green like his eyes, green like the mark Izuku left on his mother. Well then, All Might laughs awkwardly. That's interesting. Izuku doesn't know what to say. He never experienced anything like this before. Are they supposed to talk about it? Do they just continue on like it didn't happen? He doesn't know. The only words that comes out of his mouth is when he opens it. Sorry. What are you apologizing for, All my cogs? His head to the side. There's a soft smile on his face that Izuku doesn't know how to interpret. I thought it might happen. My mentor and I shared a mark as well. His expression turns something more thoughtful, more understanding. But it doesn't have to mean anything yet if you don't want it to, my young boy. Doesn't have to mean anything? Of course it means something. All Might is his childhood hero, is his soulmate. All Might loves him and will love him. Izuku starts to speak, but colorless, unloved, wordless. This must be a mistake, a fluke of the universe's part. All Might will realize that in a few days when the mark will disappear, just like his father, just like Bakugo. Izuku can tell that now, keeping him from wasting any time, but Izuku has spent years staring at his unmarked skin, wishing and hoping that now there's a gold coating on his wrist, and he can bring himself to give it up so soon, no matter how selfish that may be. Okay, he says. When Izuku gets home that night, Inko sees his wrist right away. The dish she was holding in the air with her crook crashes in a sink, causing soapy water to splatter against the wall. Oh, she breathes, eyes wide and shiny as she approaches, holding his wrist gingerly, like he used to when Bakugo punched him. She She gently takes his hand, studying the mark like it's something precious, running her finger over it like she can't believe it's real. Then she pulls Izuku into a hug, so fierce that he thinks he might actually suffocate. But she doesn't ask him who it's from. He's grateful for that. Then there's Uraraka. She almost touches him, almost after she keeps him from falling with her quirk. She helps him upright by the quirk. If he hadn't been wearing long sleeves, they would have touched skin to skin. Irritably, even though he knows next to nothing about the girl he wishes they had. But then she walks away. The moment has passed. Izuku can still feel the warmth of her hand through his sleeves, though he lets that feeling carry him through the test. Lets it carry his feet right back to her. Let it carry him through the night and back down again as he falls. She touches him. It's more like a slap than a touch, actually, but beneath the stinging pain is a warm sensation, something sloping in place. Izuku's arms and legs are broken, and there's mere seconds left to get even 1 point so he can follow in All Might's footsteps. But all he can do is think about how much he wants to see the mark left on him. Oh, Uraraka says after she releases him, as she catches a glimpse of the green on her fingertips. Whoa, would you look at that? I think we're the timer buzzes. He passes out. Luckily for Izuku, the universe did not leave him with a huge handprint across his face. It did, however, leave him with 5 pink fingerprints splayed over his cheekbone, matching the pads of Uraraka's fingers. They're the prettiest thing he's ever seen. He sits in the infirmary bed waiting for a recovered girl to come back with the x-ray scans to confirm his broken bones are healed, and he runs his finger through the new marks over and over. The highest of them is a bare inch from his mother's mark. There is something about that contrast between the light pink and a dark green that pleases him. Staring in a mirror on the wall, Izuku holds his golden wrist to the pink cheek and green temple. The resulting smile is so wide that his eyes tear up a bit. Maybe it's not the fluke. Maybe he is livable after all. Which, of course, is exactly when Recovered decides to walk in. He immediately hides his hand behind his back, cheek blushing bright red, like he's been caught doing something he wasn't supposed to. Recovered girl laughs, waddling over to the bed, and scans are nearly as tall as her. It's a shame, she says. Izuku's heart tightens and embraces that all of the students who were here for the entrance exam have already left. Oh? Izuku had, shocked. He hasn't even thought about that. How is he supposed to get in contact with her again? That can't be it, right? They left soul marks on each other, and there's no way they won't meet again. And then Izuku remembers his soul score is nothing. Maybe that is it. Then, will her mark fade too? How long will it take for the pink to disappear like it was never there after all? I wouldn't worry about it too much, Sunny, Recovered girl says, and turns her back to him. A reassuring smile on her face, her lips are bright, harsh yellow, that Izuku thought was lipstick, but now he wonders. I have a feeling you'll see her again. For whatever reason he believes her, maybe just desperation that he's clinging on to hope. Thanks, he says. You're welcome now. Let's take a look at those scans. He gets into UA. He knows it's not possible that you only feel something from your soul mark when your soulmate is touching them, but Izuku swears when the hologram is unplaying and all 3 of his marks radiating warmth. The second Izuku opens the door to the 1A classroom, he's met with excited shouts, and then he nearly blown over by the flash of brown hair. Soulmate! Uraraka clings to him like a koala, practically vibrating with energy. Izuku's cheeks go bright red as he realizes nearly everyone is staring at them. Is all Izuku can say, because theoretically he'd known this was going to happen, but that doesn't mean he's prepared. I'm glad you got in. I knew you would. She let go, but staying right next to him, like it's something casual, or maybe it is to her. He thinks as he notes the other marks lingering on her skin. She remembers and pats her fingers against the pink spot on his cheek. Each point contact heats up with a glowing ember, emanating a pleasant heat across the skin. Unconsciously, Izuku leans into touch, and Uraraka giggles. If you're just here to meet your soulmate, then you can pack up your stuff, someone says behind them. A warm despairing as both of them turn their face to the talking yellow sleeping bag on the floor. Welcome to UA's hero course. This should be interesting. His classmates are a myriad of bright colors, both their own and the ones the others have painted on them. Ashito's hands look like they're pressed into a paint palette. Kirishima's marks stretch and crack whenever he uses quirk. Tsuyu has a line of 3 infant handprints going down her arm. He's not jealous. He's not. About 10 minutes into the quirk assessment, Ida approaches him. Izuku attempts to clamp down on the instinct of fear that rises in him. He can still see the cold glint of Ida's eyes as he reprimanded Izuku before the exam, but it doesn't really work. So he ends up staring at the ground. Ida comes up next to him. I'm afraid I misjudged you before, Ida said. Izuku glanced up at him, shocked. You saw something in the exam the rest of us didn't. You must have been perceptive. No, Izuku turned to face him to argue, explained that he really didn't know. As he does, his bare elbow brushes against Ida. Something happens. 2 puzzle pieces, preciously so far apart, now fits together. His elbow turns blue and Ida's turn green. They both stare in shocked silence until Ida opens his mouth. You know, I never learned your name. It's Izuku. Izuku. No. It's Midoriya Izuku. Nice to meet you. Likewise. When Tsuyu's tongue wraps around his waist and pulls him away from the water villain, it brushes over the exposed forearm. At first, Izuku thinks somehow it left a mark on himself, but then he sees the green he left on the tip of her tongue. Whatever they marvel over their marks together shines some light on them and realize their greens are just a few shades apart. Now all they can do is fight to keep each other safe. The USJ is probably the most terrified he's ever felt in his life, even above the slime villain attack, and yet he still manages to walk out of it feeling a tiny bit more loved than he did before. A few days later, when they are all gathered in a field in their hero costume training, Izuku looks over to Baku, his jaw dropped, but it's a closed thing. There is Baku's bare bicep is a vague imprint of a fist in crimson red. It's new, he thinks. It has to be. It wasn't the error in the beginning of the year. Kirishima's knuckles are stained with stitched black. How long would it take for the black to disappear? Probably forever. There's something about Todoroki that Izuku doesn't get. Whenever he looks at the other boy, he gets this feeling. It's like the first time he met Uraraka, when she kept him from falling before the entrance exam. Something hangs in the air unresolved, ready to fall into places. But that can't be right. Todoroki didn't say a single word to him until just before the sport festival. Even that was a declaration of war. How can they possibly be soulmates when the only emotion Todoroki has shown towards him is a slight disdain? It's just not possible, right? Wrong. Izuku thinks as the side of his hand brushes against Todoroki's jawline in a desperate attempt to get back his headband, and leaves a thin brush of green in its wake. A nearly dropped and he nearly drops the headband in his surprise. And not for the first time, he's grateful that he's one being carried, because otherwise he probably would have tripped. It's only after the cavalry battle that Izuku really gets to look at this new mark, stretched in the middle of the side pinky, almost down his wrist. And just like Todoroki's hair, it's a dual color mist, blue and white wisp of red, all twirled together. It's beautiful. We need to talk. Izuku jolts at the sound of Todoroki's voice, looking up nervously. What if he's mad? What if he didn't want this? But Todoroki doesn't look mad. He doesn't look at Izuku like he's just a bug to crush. There's something in his expression that Izuku can't read, but doesn't seem like a threat. Yeah, Izuku says, I think we do. So, Todoroki gaze, half hidden in the shadows, is intense and searching for what Izuku doesn't know. We're soulmates. He doesn't say it like a question. He certainly doesn't sound like one, but Izuku thinks he hears one in there anyway. Slowly uncertain of what Todoroki expects from him, exactly, he nods. There's a long moment in which Todoroki just looks at him, clenching his fist. Izuku braces himself for whatever insult or punch is coming from the boy, but when Todoroki's eyes flicker down to the mark he left on Izuku, and some of the tension, the weariness drains out a taller boy frame. Some sort of decision has been made, but Izuku doesn't know it. Have you heard of, Todoroki asked quietly, quirk marriages? Izuku knows what it feels like to be burned. He spent his whole childhood running from the sensation, has the scars to prove it. Even now, that the sound of Bakugo's explosions still make him flinch, remembering the smell of sweet nitroglycerin. Staring down, Todoroki's cradling his broken fingers. He knows what he has to do. He knows it's going to hurt. Part of him doesn't want to. Part of him just wants to leave it alone and try to win the match. Announce his presence to the world, like All Might said. But then he catches a glimpse of a swirl of white and red on his hand. Izuku realizes there's no chance here. If he can't save his own soulmate, how is he supposed to call himself a hero? As he charges a distance, part of his mind says, I hope soul marks can be burnt off. There's another mark from the sport festival he doesn't notice until finally home, curled next to his mom on the couch. It's a light spot of purple on his forearm, something he assumed to be a bruise earlier and ignored. He poked it just to be sure, but it doesn't hurt. And the same faded purple as Shinzo's hair. Distantly, Izuku remembers charging Izuku, remembering when his arm may have first made contact with him. He hadn't noticed anything then, too distracted by the adrenaline in his system, by pulsing need to fight and win. Has Shinzo noticed? Did he just not say anything? Or is he like Izuku, just now seeing the brush stroke of green on his skin? Izuku thinks about it, what it must look like, his green on Shinzo's skin, and then he thinks about the strip he left on Todoroki's jaw, green onto his tongue, Ida's elbow, Roka's fingerprints, All Might's palm, his mom's hand. All the proof that he exists, that he is loved, and is love backed. That he is no longer colorless, unloved, and worthless. He smiles. Things change after that. Todoroki doesn't join their little friend group right away. It's more like a gradually absorption. Izuku invites him to eat lunch with them, and he takes a week to take him up on it. Then upon Ida's request, he comes to their study group. Eventually he's there with them all the time. Izuku does not high-five Roka about it. It's totally unrelated. Why do you ask Todoroki? Eventually, he's there with them all the time. Izuku does not high-five Uraka about this. It's totally unrelated. Why do you ask Todoroki? Shinzo, on the other hand, doesn't speak to him for a couple weeks, and then suddenly, part of his group, he just sits down there, table in an empty spot next to Izuku, with no explanation. I think Morima might be related to Best Jeanist. Izuku grins at him as the table immediately falls in chaos, but the most surprising change is probably how touchy everyone gets. Inside and outside of class, suddenly overwhelming him around a surprise hugs, hands rubbing his back, arms slung over his shoulder, high-fived. Just so much contact from his friends throw around like something casual and normal. It probably is, Izuku reminds himself. Not everyone grew up being shunned by most people around them. It's a lot. At first, Izuku isn't used to people wanting to touch him without wanting to hurt him. So when he sees someone approaching out of the corner of his eyes, their hands stretched out, he tends to flinch or tense. No one mentions it, but he knows that their shared worried glance, and they notice that he's just glad that they haven't asked them yet. But then the thing is, even despite that he loves it, even when they're not touching soul marks together, his friends are so warm and loving, and he comes to crave their hugs soon enough, becomes regular part of their routine. Uraka drums her fingers against Izuku's cheek while they study. Ida sits elbow to elbow with him at the cafeteria table. Tsu lets her tongue catch Izuku's forearm whenever they train together. Even Shinzo rests his arm on Izuku's when they hang out. Tori takes a bit longer to come around. He's kiddish when it comes to physical contact, more so than Izuku, so they're all patient with him, waiting for him to come to them. And then one day at the library, Todoroki comes up to Izuku and sits next to him on a couch without a word, and he lays down, wiggling his head until it prompted up again Izuku's tie, and carefully grabbed Izuku's hand and glided it over his jaw, so his soul mark rest against each other. Then he closes his eyes. Izuku doesn't say anything about it then or later, but he does smile so wide it hurts his cheek. This new normal is unexpected, but certainly not unwelcome. Even after they get to the hospital, even after they're safe and Stain is gone, Izuku can't get his body to calm down. The clock reads 3:42 in the morning, and he's still awake, the loudest sound being pounding of his heart. He's so close to getting up and going for a jog. Injuries damn. When Ida quietly says to Daria, "Are you awake?" His head snaps at Ida's bed across the room, but all he sees is a dark mass on a bed. Yeah, he whispers, trying not to wake up Todoroki. "Can you?" Ida trails off, sounding lost. It's something so unfamiliar, and Ida and Todoroki almost feel like crying. How did he miss this? How did he not realize that his soulmate was going through? Ida could have died because of his mistake. Izuku put a tight lock on his thoughts, and they won't help him right now. Ida doesn't say anything else, so he can only guess that his friend wants. It's the same thing that he wants. As quiet as a mouse, he slips out of bed and half tiptoes, half hops to Ida's bed, here closer to his friend. There's enough moonlight to see the way that Ida's eyes shine with unshed tears in the tie. Distraught looks on his face. Ida doesn't look at him, but Ida scoot over wordlessly, mindful of both of their injuries. Izuku climbs on the bed, curling next to Ida, slight pressing their soul-marked elbows together. The sheer relief of the worm brings them nearly overwhelming, and Ida sighs, burying his face in Izuku's green curls, while Izuku wraps his other hand in Ida's nightgown. "Can I join you?" Todoroki's voice is low and weary as he stands over the hospital bed, his blue eyes nearly glowing in the dark. They both nod, too tired for words. Really, once again, they're shuffling off limbs and blankets to make room. It fits the bed barely sufficient for one muscle teenage boy, let alone 3, but they make it work. Mostly by having Izuku and Todoroki laid on top of Ida, but it's at least semi-comfortable, so no one complains. Izuku lays there, elbow pressed to Ida and hand pressed against Todoroki's jaw. He feels his heart finally slow. At last, his survival rush adrenaline protruding out at last, and he feels safe. Every soul mark Izuku has gotten thus far has been somewhat of a surprise. The slight result of growing up thinking that's impossible, but when Aizawa leaves one on him, he considered completely reevaluating his perspective on what is and what isn't surprising. It happens on a school-sanctioned field trip to Mustafa's newest hero museum. Really, they should have expected a villain attack to happen while they were there, but Izuku thinks maybe the school didn't want to jinx it by sending a bunch of teachers. Anyway, UA security oversight aside, the situation isn't that dire. It's a crew of low-level villains, clearly inexperienced, and luckily, majority of Class 1A just received their provisional license. Practically nothing compared to the things they've already faced. Or so Izuku thinks, until he's sent flying through the pan of glass over the railing overlooking the courtyard's 4-story down. Well, shit, Izuku thinks. He's pretty sure that his last words are gonna be, "Aoyama, don't hit the his last words are gonna be, "Aoyama, don't hit the All Might display," when all of a sudden something wraps around his midsection and yanks hard. His midsection and yanks hard. The breath is knocked out of him as Aizawa's capture weapon, which he's been trapped in enough times to recognize. He pulls him rapidly back up to over the edge. Aizawa clearly distracted though, because none of his usual perceptions. Izuku hits the railing hard, sending the vision shattering into the field of stars. Before the capture weapon releases him, he goes rolling across the tile floor without his hero costume. The glass shatter tears through his skin, burning and stinging. Eventually, he hits something that comes to a stop, and body aching with a sight still swimming. Izuku's first instinct is to get up and keep fighting, but when he tries, a wave of dizziness hits him and his arm crumbles beneath him. The world goes sort of fuzzy and distant after that. Izuku's aware of that things are happening around him, that there's a battle going on, but any taunts he has crumble to dust and slip out of his mind before he can pursue them. Then, out of the gray, there's a familiar dark presence. A warm but callous hand curls over the back of Izuku's neck, lifting his head off the ground. There's a familiar feeling. The hand makes contact as something clicks into place, and he can't focus long enough to recognize. Midoriya, Aizawa says, a sensei vague from solidifying to something more comprehensive to Izuku's addled mind. Follow my finger. The hand not holding Izuku up moved in front of his eyes. A single finger moved one way and the other. Izuku tries to follow it, but it moves too fast, too blurry. He's not wearing his gloves. Is the first thing Izuku really manages to register. The next thing, while he might not be able to make out how the fingers is moving, he can see very obvious splotches of green across his Aizawa's palm. Not his green, but something brighter, something more like the color present Mike's eyes. Interesting. The fingers stop. Definitely a concussion. Aizawa grumbles more. Definitely a concussion, Aizawa grumbles, more to himself than Izuku. Hold on, problem child, the medics will be here soon. Not. Izuku coughs, his eyes strangled and words slurring. Not going anywhere, sensei. His teacher snorts and suddenly starts shifting again as he pulls Izuku closer, propping him up against his side. The hand on his neck stays there, the long fingers tangled in both of Izuku's curls, and focusing on the sensation of warm feeling of safety that floods through him at this point on the connection. Suddenly, clarity reaches through him. A fog. Izuku's eyes go wide, and his hand reaches out, fumbling for his neck. Wait, don't move, Aizawa. Don't move, Aizawa hisses, batting away Izuku's hand to free it. He pauses, glancing between where his hand rests on his student's neck and Izuku's face. Jess, we'll talk about this later. You're not bleeding anywhere. They do talk about it, but it's about three briefs, still minutes, just like All Might. Aizawa reassures him that it doesn't have to mean anything if Izuku doesn't want it to. And just like All Might, Izuku agrees because he doesn't know what else to say. He feels a little more comfortable now when Izuku calls him problem child and sends glares his way. Well, it's because he knows for sure that the affection behind it. When Izuku tells him, Shinzo laughs and shows him the spot on his elbow. It's a bright, harsh yellow, just like Aizawa's goggles, just like his sleeping mat, just like the mark curling around the back of Izuku's neck. He loves it. And then Mirio shows up out of nowhere. Literally, his head pops out of the wall. Izuku spills trash everywhere while the older boy just laughs. He doesn't really believe Mirio is gonna be a significant part of his life. There's suddenly thumbprints underneath the corner of his eye, like a bright red teardrop. Izuku didn't know about it right away, but it makes Mirio pause because during their fight, eyes wide as the abnormal shape allows before his face blends into a grin even bigger than before. He faces through Midoriya, can use his distraction to land a hit. Looks like we're soulmates. Mirio voice pops right behind him. The last thing Izuku sees before getting sock punched across the room is Midoriya's green thumbs up. Mirio's dark green thumbs up. When he finally meets Sir Naida, there's an awkward minute of silence in which the pro hero stares at Izuku's golden wrist, brows drawn tight together and something unreadable crossing his face. The Night-Eye pushes his glasses and tells Izuku that he's not worthy. Eri leaves a silver smudge right beneath his eye. He doesn't see it until later, back in his dorm, but he does see the spot of green he leaves on her in return on her temple opposite to her horn. By the time he realizes it's too late, she's already in Overhaul's hands. He could try to pull her away, but Shizaki Kai, alias / Quirk Overhaul, can destroy and remake anything he touches. If he tries to save her now, he could get all of them killed. Everything in his body says move, but he forces himself to stay still as Overhaul leaves. Every added inch between him and Eri makes his heart clench and his eyes burn, but there's no choice. He will save. I will save you. I will save you. He'll never forget the desperation, hopelessness in her eyes as the villain carries her away. Later, when everything is said and done, Aizawa takes him and sees Eri in her hospital room. She sits up when he walks in. The smile that spreads across his face is small but particular grin by Eri standards. Look, she says, pointing at the green soul mark on her forehead. Her voice is hoarse and quiet. She sounds happy. It didn't disappear when he took me apart. Izuku smiles. He has to keep the awful horror guilt in his stomach off his face. Of course not, he says, sitting down on the bed next to her. His instincts is to pull her into his arms. He doesn't. He waits for her to come to him if she wants. This one will only disappear if you want it to. I don't want it to. Eri shakes her head. Then goes quiet for a moment, studying her carefully folded hands in her lap. She glances up at Izuku, eyes flickering briefly at his mark, and then back up again before he scoots closer to her. Can I? Immediately, he opens his arms to her, and the wind nearly knocks out of him when she rushes into his chest. The slide of her forehead quickly finds its way beneath his ear, and a warmth rushes through him from the point of contact. Based on the happy sigh escaped from Eri. She must feel it too. They sit like that for a while, Eri finally safe in her soulmate's arms until she falls asleep. Afterwards, when Izuku leaves the hospital room, he barely makes it halfway down the hallway before bursting into tears. Aizawa doesn't ask any question, just places his hand over the back of Izuku's neck and holds him close. There used to be dusting of warm yellow on All Might's knuckles. He never said whose mark it was, but sometimes Izuku noticed him rubbing it with a sad look on his face. After Sir Naida dies, All Might's mark goes with him. All Might's marks goes with him. Izuku does what he can, and he knows the pain of a lost soul mark as all too well. The mark may be gone, but the memories, the empty space will always be there. Sometimes things are bad. There is a bad night when Izuku can't sleep. He chases out his bed by Stain's blade, or Shigaraki's hand on his throat, or worse, the awkward curve of Sir Naida's broken back as he spikes just up through his chest, or he just doesn't get in the first place. Kept up by the weight of the world on his shoulders, by fingers pointed at him through the screen and your necks. Maybe it's a soul mark, or maybe they just know him that well, but one of his friends is always there to keep him company. Shinzo is almost always awake anyway. Insomnia, he explains with a shrug. And they play video games on their handhelds until the sun is coming up. And Aizawa's lecture then on their sleeping habits. Uraka stays up late doing homework sometimes, so she'll sit with him, humming along to some pop song. Tsuyu drinks tea with him, and sometimes they talk about the USJ and the fears being turned into dust. Todoroki binges old documentaries about All Might with him. He's seen them all, of course, but Todoroki hasn't. Ida usually is asleep, but sometimes he'll get up extra early so they can go in their morning jog before the sunrise. And then there's a bad day when anxiety settles across his bones like an old friend. It's hard to keep functioning that when All Might pulls him into the teacher's lounge during lunch and pushes a steaming cup of tea into his hands, or when Miuro trains with him, laughing as they try to run miles on the steepness setting the treadmill have. Or Aizawa takes him to see Eri and they read Sailor Moon or watch old animes together. Sometimes things are bad, but his soulmates are always there to make it better. Towards the end of the second semester, Aizawa gives permission to spend a weekend at home. Inko makes Katsudon for dinner. Their first night, the whole time Izuku eats and she watches him carefully after they finish and clean up. She gently grabs Izuku's golden wrist like she did when he first came home with the mark. She traces over it and then looks at the mark above it. A light purple on his forearms, the blue on his elbow. Grabbing his other hand, she looks at those marks too. Delicate red and white on his side, a foggy green strip a few inches below his wrist. And then she looks at his marks on his face, pastel pink and a victory red fingerprint, a silver spot under his eye, and a harsh yellow peeking around his neck. Inko drops his hands, pushes his hair back from his forehead, lets her fingerprints drift across his very first soul mark, and smiles even with tears in her eyes. "I'm happy for you," she says. Izuku's starting to tear up too. He knows exactly where to go. He knows exactly where he got the watermark's tendency. It's why he's not nearly as embarrassed of it as he probably should be. "Thank you." Izuku wraps his arms around his mom, and even though none of them besides her are here, he can feel the familiar warmth in the rainbow they've painted across him. "I love them all so much." "I know." Her hands cart through his curls, soft and gently. They love him too. They love me too. Just like they should." Inko laughs a little bit, squeezing him. He'll probably never stop having doubts. He'll probably never completely get over the fears that one day one of these marks will disappear, just like they did before. But now, in his mother's arms, so many colors, red, not real, not markers, not pretend, left on it. Izuku can't help but feel loved. Well, I hope you enjoyed. So this is just the part 1, and if I'm right, there's 3 other parts. I'll try reading the part tomorrow, so it's gonna be out as soon as possible. Well, not tomorrow, because technically we're already October 3rd, because I'm recording this at midnight, but you know. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed. Sorry if I stumbled or said some words improperly. I have dyslexia, so sometimes when I read things, I don't read it properly, I guess, or I read something else and I say it out loud, so I try to fix it, but it's not always easy, so I hope you guys really don't mind, because it's hard to control, but you know. Anyway, I hope you guys have a good night, a good evening, a good day, whenever, wherever it is. I hope you guys also really enjoyed. I really love this fic. I'm happy my friend recommended it to me. And yeah, this is such a wholesome fic. I love it. I love platonic soulmates. It's the best thing in the world. It's like, I love soulmates, but platonic soulmates are even better, because it's like, it's just like, oh, you love me and you love me back, and there's like the universe put us together, so that means it has to be real. But it kind of hurts how he lost his Bakugo, but we're gonna get more context on that in the later parts. So yeah, anyway, I hope this was good. I hope you didn't mind my stuttering, my repeating stuff, and hopefully the sound quality is fine. But yeah, anyway, I'm gonna leave you guys now, and yeah, if you have any critics or questions or recommendations, even, I'll take any recommendation. Just leave them in the comments and I will go over them. Anyway, love you, have a good night, and don't forget to stay hydrated, okay? Bye.